Well, thank you very much for that very warm welcome. Can I begin my remarks today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and by paying my respects to their elders past and present. To a number of parliamentary colleagues who have joined us here today, Daniel Molino, Frank Maguire, Colin Brooks and Anthony Carbines, and any others I've missed, please consider yourself duly acknowledged. To Stephen Martin, the Chief Executive of CEDA, Stephen Spargo, I think, is here as well, the State President of CEDA, Lynn Cobley. Of course, we've had another very engaging conversation about where the state of our nation and world and some of the opportunities. It's always good to speak to the State's banker about such matters. To Professor Bruce Rasmussen, thanks very much. I only caught the second half of your presentation, but thank you for the work that you do and the questions you ask and the debate that you are central to. And to Andrew Worrell, thanks very much for being such a proud Victorian, re-engaging with your hometown and being a great advertisement of the best and the brightest coming from this, not only the world's most livable city, but indeed a place of ideas, a place of innovation and a real place of strength. Now, first of all, last time I was here I spoke to you at some length about our commitment as a government to greater gender balance on government boards, including our courts, so that we could have a proper representation of the Victorian community in those leadership positions. I am very proud to inform you that since we made that commitment more than a year ago, 51% of those appointments have been women, in full delivery of the commitment that we made. And it's not just boards, as important as they are, and it's not just boards in the delivery of services, it's our cultural institutions, and it's our Magistrates Court, our County Court, our Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal. All of these positions that have fallen vacant during this last 12 months have been, 51% of them have been, those appointments have been women, and that's just the way it should be. The fact that that is a leadership position in our nation is perhaps a commentary on all of us, but we're very pleased to play that role. You get much better decisions when you include the entire community in making those important decisions. Now, I think it's fair to say that it's been somewhat of a turbulent week in our world, and I don't want to be a commentator on US domestic politics, but in the wake of that presidential election, there has been a lot of questions asked, a lot of debate and discussion, a lot of wringing of hands, and indeed scratching of heads as people have tried to work out how it is that so many from the elite political class and just ordinary people on the street, I expect, including pollsters, of course, back home in America, how is it that we all of us got this so terribly wrong? I think that we'll let the experts continue that important analysis in the weeks and months ahead. That'll go for a period of time, and then perhaps there'll be a proper switch towards what the new administration means for both those in the United States and also the world more broadly. But I think one thing in the short term that we can take from President-elect Trump's victory and the fact that so many people just failed to pick it is that there's not a moment to waste. In politics, you need to be delivering, and you need to be delivering each and every day. And what's more, you have to remain connected. You have to remain closely aligned to the community, not sections of, but the entire community that you are there to serve. You've got to keep making the argument, and you've got to keep making sure that you're making change and reform, and that the entire community are sharing in the benefits of the prosperity that hopefully a good government underpins. They're not bolts from the blue lessons, but it's a timely reminder that that connectivity and, to a certain extent, urgency in public policy and public administration has perhaps never been more important in such a fast-paced and dynamic world. Now, as our world changes, and we've seen from earlier presentations some details about what some of those changes mean for our state, our city and our state, but as our world changes and as our economy transforms, as some enduring strengths like manufacturing will remain a key feature, perhaps in a slightly different form, but as we see economic change at an industry level, at a regional level, and of course right across entire economies, we do have to make sure that no one is left behind and that there is strong support to make that change, that there's a recognition in policy terms and in political terms as well that change is not easy. It's very challenging. That connection, I think, is very, very important. It's something that we understand as a government, and it's something that drives us both in practice but also in the culture that we've built these last 2 years. A culture of engagement, a culture of listening, a culture of getting things done. And the third of those things is perhaps the most important. Even governments that are in for a long time, it is not a long time in the scheme of things. And there really is not a moment to waste. There's no time to lose. There's got to be a sense of urgency, a sense of real commitment to delivering results and sharing the proceeds of that activity and that energy as broadly as possible. I want you all to know that that culture that we have built over these last 2 years, it won't be changing anytime soon. We will continue to work very hard to deliver for the entire Victorian community, and not just for today, but of course setting us up for even better times in the medium and long term. Now, I don't want to go through an exhaustive brag book, if you like, of all the things that we're doing, but it is a state of the state, and it is appropriate that I give you some numbers. None of you are afraid of numbers in this room. I'll give you some numbers as to our effectiveness, the strength of the position that we enjoy at the moment, and then talk a little bit about some of the other investments and decisions, some of the priorities that we've set. If you look at the 15-16 budget position, we've achieved an operating result of $2.7 billion. That is more than double that of the previous year at about $1.2 billion. A very, very strong set of accounts and a very strong balance sheet. We have estimated growth rate of 3% for the 16-17 year, and our annual state final demand grew by about 3.5%, nearly 2.5 times the national average. That is really important in and of itself. The number of Victorian jobs is growing too. Each of you, so many employees in the room, you will know that there's a fair bit going on out there, a fair bit of activity, and it's being seen right throughout our labour market, even to the point of having some shortages in a number of key areas. Employment growth, jobs growth at 3.6% over the last 12 months. For the record, New South Wales job rate for the same period was 1.8%. Not that I would ever be as churlish as to criticise our northern friends. It means that about 176,000 jobs have been created since the government came to office, and more than 2/3 of those are full-time jobs. That's something that all of us, as proud Victorians and indeed proud Australians, should be really pleased about. Those numbers are more than that. They're stories of hope and dignity. They're stories of progress. They're stories of the prosperity that we want, of course, all of us, for every one of our fellow Victorians. Each of you know, thank you very much. Feel free to clap. It's absolutely fine. Very good. Just in time for the cameras to arrive to hear you clap. That's very good. The other thing too, and this is an important point, the stability of the Victorian balance sheet, the stability of our financial position, the certainty and stability in our state is also a great asset. We are only one of 2 states to have that AAA rating from both of the major rating agencies. It's very, very important to us, and it's why we have a fundamentally responsible attitude towards surplus budgeting, managing our debt profile properly, and getting things done. Productivity enhancing infrastructure is also a great way of supporting that very high and I think entirely accurate credit rating. It does mean a lot to us, and we consistently reinvest through our leadership and our style of leadership in that credit rating. Look, with strong economic conditions and I think a well-earned reputation in lots of other areas, whether it be in arts and culture, sport, retail, fashion, knowledge, literature, creativity, the list goes on and on. We're also, of course, the fastest growing state in our nation. Our population has just reached 6 million, and that really is something that we should embrace and we should celebrate, and we should be energised by meeting that challenge, not afraid of it, and not in any way compromising that continued growth as we look to the future. We also have an enviable reputation by virtue of the qualities and the practice the leadership of our private sector as well. I want to make that point too. It's not just about all of those fields I just mentioned or the work of government. That plays a part, of course, but the innovation, the hard work, the quality of the offering from a very diverse private sector, seen in the slides we had before with very strong growth prospects for the future, that should be a source of pride for you, and it certainly is for me. We have, I think, dare I use the term, a very agile private sector in this state, one that is always up for managing solutions, always up for finding ways to solve problems, and always up for partnership. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But look, all of this boils down to one central premise. Are you getting things done, and are you sharing from that? Are you sharing the proceeds? Are you distributing the proceeds of good fortune and prosperity, and making sure that people have got the fundamentals, the basics, the really, those things that have always been defining features of state politics and defining features of livable cities and states and jurisdictions with good prospects for the future. Of course, I'm talking about jobs, hospitals, schools, a transport network, all those things that are central to a decent quality of life. Now, our financial prosperity, as I've said, should flow on to every Victorian, not merely as numbers in a spreadsheet, but that prosperity, that good fortune should help to change people's lives for the better. It's why we're investing in our schools and in a more solid future. We're upgrading 1,000 schools across the state, and we're building plenty of new schools in those rapidly growing parts of Melbourne and Victoria. After a period of shameful neglect, we are reopening, resurrecting and making better than ever our vocational education and training system, and I know how important that is to each of you as employers and investors. Investing in the skills of our workforce both for today and the future, well, arguably there's no more important investment that we can make. Our TAFEs are in a much, much better position today. There's more to do, of course, but vocational education and training, we're not just going to repair the damage that was done, we are going to make this sector the best in our nation and better than it has ever been. And I think your profitability and our offering to the world will only be strengthened by those investments. We are delivering in our hospitals when you need the care that only really a properly resourced public hospital system can provide, then perhaps there's nothing more important than that at that time for you and your loved ones. To give you a sense of that investment, $2.45 billion in extra funding in this year's budget alone. That is really about getting more people the treatment that they need much faster, and it's also about backing those in our wonderful public and through partnerships, our private sector, who've got the edge, I think, nationally when it comes to pharmaceuticals, medical devices, therapeutic, med tech. This is a very exciting part of our system as well. The other opportunity, of course, is to make great breakthroughs and discoveries that have benefits well beyond our borders here. A strong and healthy and well-funded public hospital system makes more likely all of those job opportunities, all those great discoveries, that next blockbuster drug with a value chain back to a Victorian company, all of that's more likely through targeted investment and industry policy, but also a well-funded and well-functioning public hospital system. I'll give you one example. It's not just numbers and it's not just patents as well, as important as they are, but 48,000 patients received their surgery in our hospitals in the June quarter just gone. That's the highest number of patients ever to receive elective surgery in our public hospital system. Now that means a lot. It's getting what you need much faster, getting you back to work, getting you back to family. It's about efficiency, and then it's about dividends that are really hard to measure. And the pain involved in languishing on waiting lists for far too long, we perhaps can't measure that other than to say we're doing more surgery than we ever have, and there are, if the Health Minister were here, she could give you a list of significant metrics where we are meeting the challenges of rising demand through ageing, through the fact that the health system is doing more for more people, and all of that's possible through the good work of our staff, but only because we're making health investments a priority. Now, work doesn't stop there, of course. We're also addressing our biggest law and order issue, an issue that many of you have heard me talk about many times in many different forums. This is social policy, but it's economic policy as well. It's decency. And that is, of course, acting to deal with the epidemic of family violence right across our state and our nation. We are implementing every single one of the 227 recommendations given to us by Australia's only Royal Commission into family violence, the Victorian Royal Commission into family violence. And that's all about providing funding certainty for an amazing sector, a group of people who work so very hard, including our dedicated men and women of Victoria Police, Specialist Family Violence Services, so many who work so hard to provide sanctuary and safety, certainty, empowerment, and to give options back to people who feel that they have none. This work changes lives, this work saves lives. There's just no doubt about that. We want to provide further support and certainty, and the way we'll do that is not just through our words and the strong positions we've taken, but also through continued strong investment. Some $600 million we provided in this year's budget, and we want to continue to support those who need that help and safety most through continued funding. Every one of those 227 recommendations will be delivered in full. Just last weekend, again, as part of social policy, but one that has a really quite a sharp economic impact, at our party state conference, I made some announcements about a $109 million package to support 19,000 Victorians who either are homeless or are at real risk of losing their home. That's, put another way, that's a package of reform and support that recognises fundamentally that in the world's most livable city there are thousands of people who have nowhere to live. That's something that we need to reflect on, and it's something that is not only important for the dignity of each and every person who will be assisted into much more stable and certain circumstances, giving them a platform to rebuild their life, but it's also, this is a real challenge for our visitor economy, for the way our city is viewed, the way our state is viewed. It's always the right thing to do the right thing, and that's investing in these services and making sure that fairness is absolutely central when it comes to supporting the most vulnerable in our community. Now, moving on to some more tangible projects and investments that really are central to the state of our state at this point in time. These are not run-of-the-mill investments. These are projects that come along very rarely. They're projects that will recast and reshape our state. They're the projects that I think some of you have heard me refer to before as oak tree projects, in that those who plant them may not necessarily be around to sit under them because they do take some time, but they are a great gift to I think, to the whole state in the medium term. Some of them happen much more quickly. $10.4 billion, that's what we're investing in public transport and roads just in this budget. Probably the top example of that is, of course, the Metro Tunnel. This really will profoundly change the way that our public transport system works. It'll also create thousands of jobs. This infrastructure agenda is not just about the benefits that come from the investment itself, but it really is about putting Victorians to work in good jobs with good terms and conditions and a real sense of certainty for the future. Can I say to you as well, we are very proud to have a policy where 10% of the workforce on this bigger than we've ever seen infrastructure program of works, we are very proud to have 10% of that workforce as apprentices, cadets or trainees. Metro Tunnel creates about 4,000 jobs. It delivers that turn-up-and-go public transport system. No timetable required, great city and state in the world getting a public transport system to match. We're of course removing 50 level crossings. These are congested, they're dangerous, they're relics of the past and they have to go. And what's more, through good procurement policy, we are using Australian steel, 100% Australian steel, in getting rid of these terribly dangerous and relics of the past that are holding us back in lots of different ways, both from a road point of view but also holding us back from running more trains more often. Speaking of more trains, we have just placed the biggest order of rolling stock that the state has ever seen. and built right here in Victoria by Victorians, a great investment in that rolling stock industry. Our friends in New South Wales have placed a big order recently as well, but they're shipping all of those jobs offshore because they're buying those trains from somewhere else. They're not investing in their own skills, their own people, their own economic diversity. That's, I'm sure, a cause of great sadness for many in that industry up north, but we have a very different approach. A big order and a big order book giving certainty to this sector and the highest local content that any Australian rolling stock order has ever seen, with some other benefits as well. Support for transitioning auto workers. We really are making a big difference to this industry and this sector, and of course the public transport experience also. Just yesterday, rounding out transport, just yesterday I was out in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, which are growing. Beautiful part of the city and state, but they're growing and there's some challenge there to keep pace with that growth. I was out there to announce the contracts have been signed. John Holland have won the work to extend the Mernda rail line. This is quite an historic extension to our suburban rail network. It creates about 3,000 jobs in and of itself, and it's going to transform the way local roads and mobility, connectivity of that growing area. It's a really important project and just one of many that we said we'd build and we're building, and that's us playing our part for the project's benefit itself, but also to underpin demand and confidence, and we see that represented in all of those key economic figures: growth, unemployment, investor confidence, sentiment in lots of different ways. All of that is as a product, at least in part, of the government playing its proper role. Now, it's not just more of the same though. It's not just more of an old-fashioned approach. We do look to use all the levers that are at our disposal and to challenge the orthodoxy of old-fashioned thinking where we don't think that that works any longer. We really have never been reluctant to be hands-on, and we have, I think we've come to the point where we understand, not just the government, but Victorians in a broader sense, that a simple reliance on market forces doesn't always work. It really is time for us to look at different ways of partnering, different ways of engaging, different ways of being focused, not just on inputs and effort, but on the outcomes that are there for all to benefit from. Now, some would perhaps sceptically say that Labor governments are not well known for their partnerships with the private sector, but here in Victoria, nothing really could be further from the truth. I know that governments don't create every job, far from it, and I know that not every good idea comes from politicians or public servants. Our private sector, was there a murmur, a little bit of laughter then, perhaps? Not all good ideas come from those who are elected or those who provide them with their direct advice. You've got to challenge that, and you've got to make sure that you tap into all the capacity that our economy and our community has. The private sector is a really important part of that. I'll give you one example: the Western Distributor, that much-needed second river crossing, something that's been talked about for a very long time, but it'll be delivered by our government, I'm proud to say. That was a market-led proposal. It'll be a public-private partnership directly, an elegant and innovative design solution, a project of such strong benefits for the west of our city and state and for all Victorians that came directly from the private sector. Just recently, in an Australian first, we've made very significant announcements, nearly $2 billion worth of outer suburban arterial road upgrades that will in an Australian first be part of an availability payment public-private partnership. No other state's doing this for their arterial road network. On from that, we want to make sure that our partnership arrangements do help us to leverage the maximum benefit for all Victorians, to tap into all the good thinking and the innovation that's out there at the moment. It's that approach that saw us less focused on the ideology and much more focused on outcomes. That's why we made a commitment to sell a lease, long-term lease to the Port of Melbourne, and as all of you know, that was controversial at the time, but we delivered on that, and at $9.729 billion, this is one of the biggest asset recycling projects that our nation has ever seen. And why wouldn't it be? It's a fantastic port in a great state, all the right conditions for that sort of investment, a great vote of confidence And of course that then provides us with significant budgetary capacity to invest in the removal of those level crossings, to invest in regional Victoria as well, and to get things done. Again, back to that central point, delivering momentum, a sense of energy, a sense that we're getting things done. All of that's possible and enhanced because of our very strong underlying financial position. Now, I want to talk a little bit about value capture now, before I think we're going to take some questions and talk about a few other issues. There's been some announcements made by the federal government today about value capture. I take a very different view to, if you like, in my definition of how you create and capture value is very different to perhaps that which the federal government has advanced today. We will release quite soon a comprehensive and indeed Australia's first ever value creation and value capture framework. It'll ensure that all of our decisions, all the investments, all the priorities we set, all the work that we set about are all based on a proper consideration of every possible way that we can optimise outcomes. In essence, best value is a term that is best when considered broadly. It's not just about the price at the bottom of the tender, as important as that is, but it's about trying to maximise value, indeed create value, and then capture that for the benefit of everybody involved in a project, or more broadly, if you can do that. This also, I think, is a precondition for creativity and partnership and engagement with the private sector, not just competing on price, but competing on what so many Victorian companies and indeed Australian companies do so well. Finding solutions to complex problems and bringing that innovation, the ingenuity and creativity that are the hallmarks of Australian industry, bringing all that into sharp focus when it comes to dealing with many of the challenges that we face. We do want that continued creative engagement with the private sector. This approach, this value capture and creation approach, will deliver just that. Now, I want to be clear with you, this is not the punitive approach to value capture that the Prime Minister has outlined, where you effectively punish all the beneficiaries of any project that you might undertake. We're not interested in that, and we're not interested in bumping up the value of our projects by virtue of devaluing everybody else's. We think that you should be growing the total number of beneficiaries for every project, not just taxing the most immediate beneficiaries. That's not the way you create value. That's not the way that you create prosperity, and it's certainly not the way that you build a partnership with the private sector and others. So we've got a very different approach to these matters, and we'll have more to say about this quite soon, and I'm sure that CEDA and all of its members will read that important policy framework closely, and will have a lot to say about it. Can I just in closing say that to be given the chance to govern is a precious gift, and the responsibility and the right to get on and get things done, there's perhaps no greater gift that can be given to anybody in public life. With those responsibilities, with that precious gift, comes, it's a pretty simple equation. Are you a doer or are you a talker? And you don't get far in business if all you do is talk, and I don't think you get too far in politics if all you do is talk as well. So we have set a cracking pace, and the state of our state is the state of momentum. There are things happening in Melbourne, in our regional cities, right across our state. Things are happening. There is a real spark, a real sense of optimism, momentum, energy. We are getting things done, and that's what we were elected to do. But we're doing it in, might I suggest, a Labor way, a thoughtful way. We have an eye to the proceeds of all of that activity. We have an eye to fairness and equity. We have an eye to making sure that no one is left behind. And we have an eye to working towards not just ideology or being focused on inputs, but instead always being focused, captivated indeed, by the outcomes of our work. It's not how much you spend, it's not how much you've done, it's what it means for the people you serve. Governments that have got an engaging culture and a listening ear and a sense of urgency about them are the best governments. It's for others to judge where we fit into that. That'll be for others to judge. But we are not wasting a moment. We are not wasting a moment in making sure that this state does what it does best: lead our nation in infrastructure, in education and ideas, research and development, in engaging with our region, in asking the big questions that matter most for this century, and in delivering the projects that create jobs, they create wealth, and they guarantee a more prosperous future. None of this is possible, though, without the engagement that we have with CEDA, with CEDA's members, with the business community, large and small, each and every sector in each and every part of our state. I've always been certain that we were a better alternative government because of our engagement with business, and I think we are a better government of this great state because of our engagement with business. That's the state of our state. Thank you very much.